Hey, how are you guys? A big part of a non-native English speaker's accent is something that we will talk about today that is called flapping, and another thing called glottal stops in American English. Let's first talk about flapping. Flap, first of all, the verb to flap is what a bird does with their wings, right? A bird flaps their wings to fly. This verb could also be used to talk about the action of the tongue when you go to make the sound of the R in Portuguese of caro, barato. That of the R in those words is flapping. Well, this sound happens in words in English. So let's have an example here of flapping. First of all, let me start with two different words, mad and mat. Notice how I'm almost saying this plosive at the end, but I don't say it, right? Mad, mat. Let's put at the end of both these words, okay? To form two new words, matter and matter. Matter, matter. Did you hear a difference there? No, because these two words are pronounced exactly the same in American English. So when you have instances of two D's or two T's surrounded by vowels in a word, in American English, that receives a flapping sound. Matter. Matter. But what I hear Brazilians doing a lot is, especially beginners trying to pronounce both of these D's or both of these T's, madder, matter, which definitely isn't correct. Or they're putting way too much emphasis, even more emphasis than a British person would. They say madder, matter. But that even sounds like an accent in American English because we flap. You'll hear the flapping everywhere if you start listening to American English. Matter, matter, water. That's a big difference between British English and American English. Water in British English and water, we do more of the in water. So make sure when you're thinking of the flapping sound as the R in Portuguese and when you're translating that over into English, when you're practicing this a lot, that you don't mess up how the other R's are actually pronounced. The R here is actually gonna be a hard r. You know, from American English. So this phrase here is for you to just say over and over and over in your head to make sure you can tell the difference between this, what you could see as an R that flap pretty, and the other R's, which are hard R's in English. Right? Interior de São Paulo. Pretty regularly. Just say it over and over again to get the flapping and to get the R's. Pretty regularly. I think it's a little bit of a tongue twister too, huh? I already said that we can do this with double T and double D. You can also do this with certain instances of single T and single D surrounded by vowels. So let's take a look. We have, first of all, starting with double T, two words, better, little. And note here that you can actually do this with an L after the double T or the double D as well. Little. Moving on, we have wedding. So again, Brazilians here a lot of times I will hear something like wedding, right? Or maybe even wedging. No, this doesn't really sound like a T or a D. It's just a bland, generic flap. Wedding. And here too, buddy. What's up, buddy? It's pretty common for men my age to call each other buddy. Like, what's up, buddy? It's not as common for women to call men that, and women definitely, almost always don't call other women buddy, but just to let you know. So I already gave the example of water here for single T, but another couple examples are data, and also pity. And finally, single D examples, studies, body. That one's weird. I've always thought that the O is strange in the word body, right? Like, why isn't it like body? No, it's ba. Definitely don't be afraid to open the mouth wide to say this word, body. But then we have a word like mulheres, right? Women, where the O turns into an I. I can understand why English is hard, but one more time, body. Now, as is always the case with English, we have exceptions, okay? So I just thought of an exception with every single one, the double T, double D, and then single T, single D. So this is just to remind you that every time that you see a double T or double D doesn't necessarily mean that it's flapped. So for example, mitt. A mitt, you can see I'm almost pronouncing the T, mitt. A mitt is what you use to take something hot out of the oven. It's like a glove for your hand. And also that's the word for the glove that they use in the sport of baseball. And with an S at the end, mitts. You don't flap that. That's like impossible. And it's probably because it's not surrounded by vowels, right? Well, here's an instance where it's surrounded by vowel sounds, oddly. And also the L, which I said is possible. A word like paddle, for example, could be flapped with DDL. But here, oddly, actually gets the same thing with that plosive pronunciation that I talked about in the last video, where the word odd, which means like extraño, right, by itself would just be odd, like the D almost gets pronounced, but it gets stuck there. And then putting the ly to make it an adverb, we still stay with the D getting stuck here and not flapped, oddly. I don't know why, it's just what we do. And then two other examples. Obviously these aren't flapped because they're not in between other vowels. So the first letter of each of these is pronounced hard, definitely with a t and a d. And the last ones, plosives at the end of a word, usually almost pronounced but not. So tot, which is a little kid. Tot, dad, dad. Awesome. Well, there is an accent in Great Britain called Cockney. It's the same accent of the singer Adele. Hello. Her name's Adele, not Adele. Adele. And they actually remove this flap and this sound completely. So they will say better, better, and also little, little. Okay, Gavin, well, why are you teaching an accent that's only a small percentage of English speakers? Well, actually, this complete removal of that sound is called a glottal stop. Now, the glottis is a part of the throat, and a glottal stop means that your throat is actually, or your mouth is actually like stopping some of the air from moving and creating that little, separating the sounds in that, okay? Your glottis is doing that. And it's kind of funny that the word glottal has a double T in there, because we as native American English speakers would say glottal, but a Cockney speaker might say glottal, glottal. To kind of practice what this sounds like, because there are American English words where this happens too, and I'll tell you about those in a second, but you will need to practice this. Try saying this Portuguese little phraselet here, right? Like, eu fui à aula, right? I hear Brazilians sometimes saying, like with the crase here, eu fui à aula, with just a very long aula. But it's possible to separate these two. And I've heard Brazilians say before, eu fui à aula, something like that. Obviously, I'm not a native speaker, but I'm trying to reproduce that. So try that there. When you actually have to create a space here, a break here, that's a glottal stop happening in the back of your throat. À aula, à aula. And that is the feel that you need to remember when you start to pronounce these words in American English. So yes, the glottal stop happens in American English too. It happens when we have the T sound, either the double T or the single T, and on the next syllable, the word ends with an N, the letter N, okay? So let me pronounce these words for you and listen for the glottal stop. Button, kitten, gotten, eaten, mountain, Britain. I'm not saying Britain, and I'm not saying Britain, like trying to flap it. It's almost like impossible for me to feel what that feels like, to flap that, because we simply don't do that in English. There's some people in American English who like to try to speak correctly and will say, could you get me a button? A button? But that sounds really weird, and 95% of the time you will hear words pronounced with a glottal stop like this. Like, I've eaten at Outback Steakhouse 3 times. I've eaten. The T disappears completely. That is a glottal stop. Remember, again, that this is not always going to be the case. There are going to be exceptions. For example, we have a double T here, and oh, it ends with an N and a G. Should be okay, right? But we can't say like cutting. We don't say that. We say cutting. Once again with the flap, because it doesn't end with a perfect N right there. Also, obtain. Here we have a single T, has a consonant there, so that could be a problem. And also, our emphasis is on tain here. Obtain. Obter, né? Obtain. And same thing with all of our shun words. When you have shun, that doesn't have anything to do with flapping or glottal stops. That's a whole different phoneme there. Option. But Cockney speakers of English, like Adele, and also Americans, will say these words: button, kitten, gotten, eaten. And mountain's always an interesting one too, because it has NT. There is a consonant there, but we still say mountain, mountain. I live near the Rocky Mountains. Mountains. A T just disappears completely. Another word, the word didn't, D-I-D-N apostrophe T. This T disappears completely as well, and you get a glottal stop with nothing after it. Didn't. It's not always the case, but a lot of times when we have the NT in English, small advantages, it's not a glottal stop, but the T disappears, so this is kind of like halfway in between those two rules. Don't worry about that too much, but I said this today and I was thinking, oh, there's a weird glottal stop at the end. Didn't. right? And that is the correct pronunciation of didn't, exactly how a native American English speaker is gonna pronounce that. One other thing that I wanted to teach you really quick that has a glottal stop in English is the phrase, uh-oh. Uh-oh is what a kid, like a little kid says, like they push all their food off of the table and they look up and they created a mess and they say, uh-oh, right? It's like the oops, whoop, you know, of like a mistake. We even say that just, you know, adults will say this in English, like, uh-oh, like you're in trouble, uh-oh, I'm gonna have a lot of stuff to clean up, right? And we actually have a glottal stop, uh-oh, at the beginning of each of these syllables. And that's how to pronounce that in English. Just make that same sound as the aula, but do that little glottal stop before saying each of these. And there you have the classic American uh-oh, uh-oh. You can almost hear and feel your throat clicking during that. It's fascinating. Anyway, try to practice these words. You will start to notice it now that you know this rule. So say pretty regularly, practice the glottal stop, practice saying kitten, gotten, eaten, and practice listening for it. And that is your accent reduction tip. Hope you enjoyed it.